The disappearing students. Alex watched as the heavy wooden door to the detention room creaked open, revealing a dimly lit, cold space that reeked of mildew and age. He had been in trouble before too many times, in fact, but this time was different. This time, he was being sent to that detention room, the one in the basement that everyone whispered about. The urban high school he attended was strict, known for its harsh punishments. But even the teachers seemed uneasy when they had to send a student to the basement. Rumors circulated among the students, stories of kids who had gone to detention in that room and never returned. The official line was that they had transferred to other schools, but Alex had his doubts. The detention room was part of the school's original structure, dating back over a century. It had been a classroom, a storage room, and even a janitor's closet over the years, but now it was used for only one purpose: punishment. The room was located in the basement, down a narrow flight of stairs that creaked underfoot, with walls that seemed to close in the further down you went. As Alex descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and a feeling of unease settled over him. He tried to shake it off, blaming the stories he had heard from his classmates. But there was something undeniably wrong about this place. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he stepped through the doorway, the heavy door closing behind him with a resounding thud. The room was smaller than he expected, with only a single desk and chair in the center. The walls were lined with old wooden shelves, empty except for dust and cobwebs. The single light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the floor. Alex sat down at the desk, the chair creaking under his weight. The silence was oppressive, the air thick with the musty scent of decay. He drummed his fingers on the desk, trying to distract himself from the gnawing feeling of dread that had settled in his gut. He had only been there for a few minutes when the light bulb above him flickered again, then went out completely. Alex cursed under his breath, sitting in complete darkness. He fumbled in his pocket for his phone, the only source of light he had, and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the empty shelves and the cold, stone floor. As he scanned the room with the light, something caught his eye: a shadow moving across the far wall, just outside the range of his flashlight. His heart pounded in his chest as he swung the light back, but there was nothing there, just the blank, crumbling wall. Alex shook his head, trying to convince himself that it was just his imagination. But then he heard a soft, scraping sound like nails on a chalkboard, coming from the far corner of the room. The sound grew louder, more insistent, and Alex felt a chill run down his spine. He stood up, the chair screeching against the floor as he moved. The sound stopped, and the room fell silent once more, but the silence was different now. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting. "Who's there?" Alex called out, his voice echoing off the walls. There was no answer, only the faint sound of his own breathing. He took a cautious step forward, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The beam swept across the room, revealing nothing but dust and shadows. Just as he was about to turn back to his desk, the scraping sound returned, louder this time, and more frantic. It was coming from the walls, from all around him, as if the room itself was alive. Alex's heart raced as he backed away, the sound growing louder with each passing second. He tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The handle was ice cold under his hand, and no matter how hard he pulled, the door remained shut. Panic set in as the walls seemed to close in on him, the scraping noise now a cacophony of sound surrounding him. Desperate, he pounded on the door, yelling for help, but his voice was swallowed by the noise. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. The room fell silent once more, the oppressive darkness returning. Alex stood there, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know how long he stood there, but eventually, The door creaked open on its own, and the dim light from the hallway outside spilled into the room. Alex practically sprinted out of the room, his heart still racing from the ordeal. He didn't stop until he was back in the main hallway of the school, where the normalcy of fluorescent lights and chatter of students brought him back to reality. But even then, the sense of dread lingered, gnawing at the edges of his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in that room with him, something that didn't want him there. Determined to find out more, Alex began asking around, trying to gather any information he could about the detention room in the basement. Most students were reluctant to talk about it, quickly changing the subject or dismissing it as just another creepy old room in an old school. But one student, a quiet girl named Lucy, seemed to know more than she was letting on. Alex cornered her after class, and she reluctantly agreed to talk. They sat in a quiet corner of the library, and Lucy began to share what she knew. The school had a dark history, one that few people knew about. It was originally built over 100 years ago by a man named Walter Evers, a strict and authoritarian figure who believed in harsh discipline. He had been the headmaster of the school for over 3 decades, and during his tenure many students had gone missing. The official explanation was that they had run away, unable to handle the pressure of Evers' methods, but rumors had always suggested something more sinister. According to Lucy, the detention room in the basement had once been a place where Evers would conduct his special punishments. Students who were sent there were often never seen again. It was said that Evers dabbled in the occult, using the room for dark rituals meant to trap the souls of those he deemed unworthy. "They say his spirit still haunts the school," Lucy whispered, her eyes wide with fear, "and that the souls of the students he took are trapped in that room, doomed to suffer for all eternity." Alex listened in stunned silence, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The strange noises, the feeling of being watched, the door that wouldn't open, it all made sense now. But there was one thing that didn't add up. If Evers is dead, then why is the room still being used for detention? Alex asked. Lucy shrugged. The school doesn't officially acknowledge what happened. Most of the teachers don't even know about it. They just use the room because it's there, but the students die. The ones who've been there they know. Alex felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had been in that room, and he had felt the presence of something dark, something evil. He knew now that he had to go back to face whatever was in that room and put an end to it. But he couldn't do it alone. "Lucy, will you help me?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Lucy hesitated, fear flashing in her eyes. But then she nodded. "Okay, but we need to be careful. Whatever is in that room it's powerful. We have to find a way to stop it." Together, they devised a plan. Alex would go back into the room, while Lucy stayed outside as a lookout. They would bring salt, candles, and mirror items Lucy said could be used to trap and banish spirits. It was risky, and Alex wasn't sure if it would work, but he knew they had to try. As they gathered their supplies and prepared for the night ahead, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than they could handle. But it was too late to turn back now. That night, the school was eerily quiet. The usual hum of the city outside was distant, muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Alex and Lucy crept through the darkened halls, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Each step brought them closer to the basement, to the detention room, and to whatever awaited them inside. As they descended the stairs, the air grew colder, just as it had the first time Alex had been there. The oppressive atmosphere weighed down on them, making it hard to breathe. Lucy clutched the bag of supplies tightly, her knuckles white. When they reached the door to the detention room, Alex hesitated. His heart pounded in his chest, fear threatening to overwhelm him. But he couldn't back out now. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room looked the same as before, small, dimly lit, and filled with the stench of mildew. But there was something different about it this time, something that made Alex's skin crawl. The air was thick with tension, and he could almost feel eyes watching him from the shadows. Lucy set up the candles around the room, creating a circle of light in the center. She sprinkled salt along the edges, murmuring words of protection under her breath. Finally, she placed the mirror on the desk, its surface reflecting the flickering candlelight. "Are you ready?" Lucy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex nodded, though he wasn't sure he was ready at all. He stepped into the circle of light, the salt crunching under his feet. The room felt smaller now, the walls closer than ever, as if they were closing in on him. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The room was silent, the only sound the crackling of the candles. Alex began to wonder if they had been wrong, if there was nothing here after all. But just as he was about to say something, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and the flames of the candles flickered violently. A low growl echoed through the room, followed by a series of scraping noises, just like before. Alex's heart raced as he looked around, trying to find the source of the sound. But the shadows seemed to move on their own, twisting and writhing along the walls. Lucy grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Something's here," she whispered. The growling grew louder, more menacing, and Alex could feel the floor vibrating beneath his feet. The mirror on the desk began to rattle, its surface distorting as if something was trying to push through from the other side. "Alex, get in the circle," Lucy shouted, pulling him back. He stumbled into the circle of light, just as the room exploded in a whirlwind of shadows and sound. The walls seemed to ripple and bend, the air filled with the deafening noise of the growl, the scraping, and now faint whispers. The candles flickered, their light almost extinguished. As the shadows closed in, Alex clutched the locket around his neck, the one his grandmother had given him. It was supposed to protect him, but he wasn't sure it would be enough. He could feel the malevolent force pressing in on him, trying to break through the circle of light. "Lucy, what do we do?" he shouted over the noise. Lucy was chanting something, her voice drowned out by the chaos around them. She pointed to the mirror, her hand trembling. "The mirror, we have to trap it in the mirror." Alex grabbed the mirror, holding it up towards the swirling shadows. He could see something moving within them, a dark figure, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. The growling grew louder, and the shadows surged forward, as if trying to pull him into the darkness. But the mirror seemed to repel them, its surface glowing with a faint, eerie light. The figure recoiled, its form flickering, as if it was being drawn into the mirror. Alex could feel the weight of it in his hands, the pull of something far beyond his understanding. With a final shout, he thrust the mirror towards the figure, and the room exploded in a blinding flash of light. The growling stopped, the shadows vanished, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Alex fell to the floor, the mirror clattering beside him. The room was silent once more, the only sound his ragged breathing. He looked up at Lucy, who was staring at the mirror, her face pale. "Did it work?" Alex asked, his voice hoarse. Lucy nodded slowly. "I think so, but we need to get out of here, now." The following day, Alex and Lucy returned to the school, determined to ensure that whatever had been in the detention room was truly gone. They knew that the ritual wasn't over yet, they had only managed to trap the spirit, not banish it. To do that, they needed to perform a final ritual, one that would seal the spirit away for good. The school was empty, the students and teachers having left for the weekend. The empty halls echoed with their footsteps as they made their way back to the basement. Alex felt a sense of unease settle over him, the memory of the previous night still fresh in his mind. Lucy led the way, carrying a small, leather-bound book she had found in the library's restricted section. It was filled with old, handwritten notes detailing various rituals and incantations. The book had been buried among the archives, forgotten by most, But Lucy had a knack for finding things that others overlooked. When they reached the detention room, Alex hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, the room beyond dark and silent. He pushed it open, half expecting to see the shadows and hear the growling once more. But the room was empty, just as they had left it. Lucy wasted no time. She set the book down on the desk, flipping through the pages until she found the right ritual. She instructed Alex to light the candles again and to sprinkle more salt around the room, creating a protective barrier. The mirror, which had been left on the floor, was placed back on the desk, its surface still glowing faintly. "This is it," Lucy said, her voice steady but tense. "Once we start, we can't stop. We have to finish the ritual, no matter what happens." Alex nodded, his hands trembling as he lit the last candle. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew they didn't have a choice. They had to end this, once and for all. Lucy began to chant, her voice low and rhythmic, the words flowing from her lips like a song. The candles flickered, their flames growing taller, casting strange shadows on the walls. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of incense and burning wax. As she chanted, Alex could feel the room begin to change. The walls seemed to ripple, the shadows moving in ways they shouldn't. The mirror on the desk began to vibrate, the light within it pulsing in time with Lucy's words. A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing several candles. The light dimmed, and Alex could feel a presence, something dark and malevolent, closing in on them. He could hear whispers, faint at first, but growing louder, more insistent. They were the same whispers he had heard before, but now they were clearer, more distinct. "Lucy, it's happening again," Alex shouted, his voice trembling with fear. "Keep going," Lucy commanded, her voice unwavering. She continued to chant, her eyes focused on the mirror. The light within it grew brighter, almost blinding, as if something was fighting to break free. The whispers turned into growls, the air thickening with a sense of impending doom. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows pressing down on them from all sides. Alex clutched the locket around his neck, the metal cold against his skin. The mirror began to crack, fissures spreading across its surface. The light pulsed, growing stronger with each passing second. Alex could feel the pressure building, the sense that something was about to give. "Lucy, I think it's going to break," Alex shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. "Don't stop," Lucy yelled back. She raised her hands, her chant growing louder, more forceful. The mirror shook violently, the cracks spreading until the entire surface was covered. With a final, deafening crack, the mirror shattered, pieces flying across the room. The light burst forth, engulfing the room in a blinding glow. Alex shielded his eyes, the force of the explosion knocking him to the ground. When the light finally faded, the room was still. The candles had been extinguished, the mirror reduced to shards of glass on the floor. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. Lucy slowly got to her feet, her face pale but resolute. "It's done," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. "The spirit is gone." Alex looked around, the room now just an ordinary detention room. The darkness, the shadows, the malevolent presence, it was all gone. The ritual had worked. But as they left the room, closing the door behind them, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left unfinished. The mirror was shattered, the spirit banished, but the memory of that night would stay with him forever. Just as they thought it was over, the final battle began without warning. As they walked down the hallway, the air suddenly grew thick, almost suffocating. A powerful gust of wind slammed the door to the detention room shut behind them, and the hallway plunged into darkness. Lucy gasped, her grip tightening on Alex's arm. The shadows that had once haunted the detention room now spilled out into the hallway, swirling and twisting with malicious intent. The temperature dropped, and the whispers returned, louder than ever, surrounding them. "It's not over," Alex shouted, trying to pull Lucy toward the exit. but the shadows blocked their path. The darkness seemed to have a mind of its own, pushing them back, forcing them towards the room they had just escaped. Suddenly, the hallway's lights flickered back on, revealing the source of the malevolence. The figure of Walter Evers, the school's long-dead headmaster, stood at the end of the hallway. His ghostly form was twisted, distorted, his eyes burning with fury. He raised a skeletal hand, pointing directly at Alex and Lucy. "You cannot escape," Evers' voice boomed, echoing through the hallway. "You have disturbed my domain, and now you will pay." Lucy screamed as the shadows surged forward, enveloping them. Alex clutched the locket around his neck, the only protection they had left. With a desperate cry, he held it out in front of him, the metal glowing with a fierce light. The light from the locket burst forth, pushing the shadows back. Evers' form flickered, his grip on the mortal world weakening. With one final, powerful pulse of light, the locket banished Evers and the shadows, leaving the hallway silent and still. In the aftermath of the battle, Alex and Lucy stood in the now quiet hallway, their hearts still racing from the encounter. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. The shadows had retreated, and the school felt like just an ordinary building once more. But they knew better. They had come face to face with something truly evil, something that had lingered in the school for far too long. The battle had been won, but the scars would remain. "I think it's finally over," Lucy said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at the locket in Alex's hand, its glow fading as the danger passed. "You saved us, Alex." He nodded, but the victory felt hollow. He could still feel the presence of Walter Evers, still hear the whispers that had haunted him. But they were faint now, distant, as if the spirit had been weakened, its power diminished. They left the school in silence, the night air cool against their skin. As they walked away from the building, Alex couldn't help but glance back at the entrance. The door to the basement was closed, but the memories of what had happened there would never be shut away. In the days that followed, the school returned to normal. The detention room in the basement was sealed off, never to be used again. But the students still whispered about it, passing the story down from one class to the next. The legend of Walter Evers lived on, a cautionary tale of what happened to those who crossed him. As for Alex and Lucy, they moved on with their lives, but they would never forget that night. The experience had changed them, bonded them in a way that few could understand. They had faced the darkness and come out the other side, but they knew that some shadows could never truly be banished.